was far out of town one day with my 3 closest friends in the car. We were on our way home, but it was still a long drive. I was tired, and I was ready to call it a day. It was probably only 8 o'clock at night or so, but it had been a long day for all of us. I think that's how it happened, but honestly, I have no idea. The only thing I remember is a horrible crash, and my head hitting the steering wheel with a jolt. When I opened my eyes, my car had swerved off the road and had crumpled against a sturdy tree on the right side. This wasn't the first time I had been in an accident, but I had never been so shaken up before. Even after a few moments, I was clutching onto the steering wheel with shaking white knuckles, and I felt sick to my stomach. But I was able to calm myself down enough to check on my friends. The one in the passenger seat had been knocked unconscious. I think he hit his head on the dash, but I couldn't tell. The 2 in the back were wide-eyed and silent, almost huddling together and staring at me in shock. I tried to call out to them, but I couldn't speak. I was shaking too hard. I hadn't brought my cell phone with me that day, so my first instinct was to get out of the car and look for help. So I shakily unbuckled my seatbelt and opened the car door. A waft of cool evening air hit me and restored some of my senses. It would be dark soon, and I knew I had to start looking for help now, or else we may be stuck here. Like I said, it was a farming area, with nothing but fields and dirt roads in all directions. I wasn't familiar with the town, and I didn't know where I should go. So I just started walking forward, along the road, hoping for a miracle. It was a long walk. At least, it seemed long. Walking alone along a dirt road with a piercing headache on a windy evening would slow anyone down. Thankfully, my head wasn't bleeding, and I didn't seem to have any other injuries, but I probably had a bruise where my forehead had struck the steering wheel. Finally, up ahead, I saw a little house on the side of the road, standing in front of a cluster of trees where the road came to an end. And to my luck, I spotted a light in the window of the house. Willing myself to walk faster, I trotted up onto the porch and pounded on the door, feeling a strange mixture of panic and relief. Inside, I heard a set of footsteps approaching the door quickly, and a lock was unbolted. A yellow light glowed from a lamp inside of the house and cast a faint light over the man in the doorway. He was a kind-looking man, and he gazed at me with curious eyes. I explained to him that we, myself and my friends, had gotten into an accident up the road, and that we needed help. He listened carefully with a furrowed brow, bidding me to come inside once I had finished, telling me that he would be glad to help me. I stepped through the doorway into the little home and heard him gently close the door behind me. He took a seat on the little yellow couch across from the door, beside where a lamp stood, and he beckoned me closer. A gentle voice called out from a door on the left side of the room, and a woman pushed open the door. She was not old, nor was the man, but the 2 certainly had more than a few gray hairs. She was a pleasant woman, lingering in the doorway for a moment as she gazed at me with a puzzled look. But she smiled and greeted me, asking me where I had come from. The man explained my situation to her. She shook her head pitifully at me, remarking kindly that she would be happy to fix me a hot meal to soothe my nerves. But I couldn't, I explained. My friends were still up the road waiting for me. I just needed to call the police for help. They both looked at each other and exchanged worried expressions. And as they looked at each other, something happened. My already throbbing head began to ring, as though someone had clashed 2 pot covers beside my ears. I covered my ears and shook my head, and my vision began to spin. The colors faded out of the room and deformed into something terrible. Closing my eyes and shaking my head back and forth violently, the ringing eventually stopped. I opened my eyes and all was what it had been. and the two looked at me with startled faces. I hit my head, I said, beginning to shake again. The room felt freezing all of a sudden, and I began to feel sick to my stomach again. The woman rushed to my side and gripped my shoulders gently, bringing me to the couch and sitting me down beside her husband. "You sit here. I'm going to make you something to eat," she demanded, and was gone into the kitchen before I could argue. A clicking sound from another room echoed softly through the house, and after a moment, a little dog appeared. It had long ears that flopped as it trotted along the floor, and it came and sat at the man's feet, looking up at him and wagging its tail. The man smiled and picked the dog up off the floor and rested it on his lap. I smiled, gazing down at the happy little creature beside me, and patted it on the head. A few moments later, the woman appeared through the kitchen door again, holding a plate. She placed it in my hands, and I gazed down to see a thick slice of chicken, or turkey, I'm not really sure, a biscuit slathered in butter, and a pile of smoothed mashed potatoes. But as delicious as the meal she had placed down in my hands looked, I just wasn't hungry. I needed to call for help, so as politely as I could, I handed the plate back to her, asking if I could use their phone. She looked me sternly in the eye for a moment, and as she did, the ringing in my ears returned, and the color drained out of the room. But I realized it was not my eyes that were changing. It was the room itself. The bright, beautifully colored wallpaper slowly faded, and strips peeled down from the walls. Cobwebs appeared in the corners and draped from the ceilings, and the woman, suddenly she was standing before me, a corpse. Her eyes black hollow holes, her skin rotting, and the plate between her blue fingers writhed with insects devouring the remains of the meal she had been holding. I gagged and turned my face away, only to gaze into the empty black eye sockets of the man beside me, whose face was rotted beyond recognition. And there on his lap lay the dog, but its eyes were still in its head, glassy and gazing off at nothing, dead. The room was freezing, and a horrible stench filled the air. But as quickly as the room had transformed into a nightmare before me, it vanished as I blinked, and again the woman was standing before me. I wanted to throw up, but instead I sprang to my feet and ran. With all of my strength, I slammed into the front door and flung it open. I stumbled out onto the porch. It was pitch black out by now, but I didn't care. I ran sprinting along that dirt road I had followed until I reached my car, and without hesitation, I flung open the driver's side door and threw myself into the seat. Turning to my friend beside me, I began to tell him what had happened, but I froze and felt my stomach lurch as I gazed into the black recesses of his eye sockets and breathed in the stench emanating from his blue skin. Turning around in my seat, I gazed into the back of the car and saw my two friends there, crumpled together with flesh rotting away from their bodies. At this point, I think I started crying, or at least I heard myself sobbing, but no tears came. I jumped out of the car and slammed the door shut, gazing into my reflection in the dark window and staring straight into my own hollow, black eye sockets.